Hi everybody, my name is Robert Jacobson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Council on Problem Gambling, and many of you may have actually recognized me from last year's class or classes in years prior to that. Today we're going to be talking about problem gambling, signs, symptoms, and help. This is a class that we do every year here at Yaamava because while the vast majority of our guests are able to gamble without ever developing a problem, a small percentage of them will develop a problem at some point in their lifetimes. And here at Yaamava, we take it seriously and we ingrain it as a core part of our culture to ensure that those of our guests who do develop a problem are able to reach out and are able to receive information about help and prevention services available to them. I mentioned that I'm with the California Council on Problem Gambling, but who are they? CCPG is a nonprofit organization. It was founded in 1986, so we just celebrated our 35th anniversary. And we exist entirely to help those who have been impacted by gambling problems, whether it's their own or someone else's. We do this through several different ways and several different types of programs. Our largest program is operation of the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. We have signs with that number posted around the casino. The number is posted on all of our ATM and credit card transaction and cash transaction machines, ticket redemption machines. It's on the back of our rewards card. It's on our marketing materials. It is the number that we provide to anybody who's been harmed by their gambling or by the gambling of somebody else. Now, our other programs are focused primarily on raising awareness through community outreach and training such as this one, or going out to community events, often for populations that are higher what we call prevalence or a higher risk of developing a gambling problem. We're often at very large general community events as well. And then we have training programs for various other audiences. So it's not just casinos. We actually train law enforcement agencies, we've trained the military, we train government agencies, we train at colleges and universities and a variety of other locations. We also have 3 websites, one of which, CalPG Online, is an online learning portal for drug and alcohol counselors or for therapists or doctors who have gone to school for and been educated on treating people with addiction problems, but who may not have had that same education when it comes to gambling addiction. We're able to take what they already know and enhance that and build upon it so that they can work with problem gamblers in their practices as well. Now we have 2 other websites. CalPG.org is the main company website, and HowToExclude.org is a brand new website that we just launched. As some of you may know, self-exclusion in California can be complicated because there are more than 65 different tribal governments regulating their independent property. So somebody who wants to self-exclude in California has to self-exclude from each individual tribal casino as well as from those in the state. So HowToExclude.org, it aims to make this process a little bit easier by taking all the information about all the different self-exclusion programs throughout the state and centralizing them into one location so that if you're unsure how to exclude at the casino or casinos nearest to you, you can go to this website and find out more. We work in an industry where, as I mentioned earlier, the majority of our customers are able to come in and treat it exactly as it's supposed to be, entertainment. Most of our customers can come in, they can spend the amount of money that they're comfortable with, stay for the amount of time that they're comfortable with, and then go back home to their families and come back maybe in a couple of weeks. But a small percentage of our guests, just under 4%, will eventually start to lose control. The amount of time or the amount of money or the impact on their relationships, ultimately, they will start to develop a problem. We have a little bit of like a moral or an ethical obligation to help those individuals. But there actually is a business case to make sure that we get help for our guests as well. So the average person who develops a gambling addiction will lose about $20,000 to $25,000 from the time they begin to develop their addiction until the time where they kind of bottom out. So you may be gambling just fine and fine and fine and fine and fine, and then one day, for most people, it's somewhere after they've been gambling for about 10 years, but one day you start to gamble a little bit more than you can handle. And that goes up and it goes up and it goes up, and it goes through about a 13-month process where you just kind of go all the way up and then you drop all the way back down. Now, why do you drop back down? Because eventually you run out of access to money and the gambling starts to cause problems in your life and with your relationships and with your job. When I worked in the gaming industry, I handled incredible amounts of money. $50,000, $100,000 buy-ins, bricks of $100 bills and $10,000 wrappings, right? Amounts of money that I have never handled before and probably never will again. So it's easy to imagine that somebody who develops a gambling addiction is losing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. But the reality of it is that most people who develop an addiction don't have access to or the ability to borrow hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. If, on the other hand, a guest who's able to gamble in a healthy fashion comes in just maybe twice a month, once every 2 weeks, they spend $100 per visit, so that's $200 a month, but they do that over like a 20-year relationship. $2,400 a year is almost $50,000 in a 20-year relationship. Double that for a 40-year lifetime relationship, that's $100,000. By developing long-term relationships with our guests, the company is more profitable and those guests are happier. Those happier guests, they're not making us feel bad. They're not hurting team member morale. They're also not making other guests feel uncomfortable. They're not asking other guests to borrow money. They're not banging on the tables or, in the most heartbreaking cases, sitting at a machine and crying because they don't know what to do. And as a result, our atmosphere is more fun because the guests that are coming in are gambling in a healthy fashion and having more fun. And that's just better for business all around. Conversely, if all of our guests were unhappy, then all of our team members would be unhappy. And then everybody would go home and they would write a bad review on Yelp and they would tell all their friends and family about what a bad experience they had, and that would be bad for business. By giving you the information to help a guest who reaches out, to help a guest who's hurting, and to help a guest who's in need, we're able to make sure those guests are then able to gamble in a healthier fashion in the future, or if they can't gamble anymore, they're not here to harm the experience of our other guests, and ultimately, we create a healthier environment, which is better for our guests, it's better for our team members, and thus it's better for all of us. But what actually is gambling? Well, the law defines gambling as risking something of value with the chance to gain something of value when the outcome is uncertain. Or, in simpler terms, we could say prize, chance, and consideration. Is it gambling if you go to a blackjack table and you bet $20? Well, sure, you risk $20 for the chance to win 20 or 30 on a blackjack. So you risk something of value to gain something of value, and the outcome was uncertain. But what if you're playing a video game? A loot box is basically like something that you can buy in a video game that has just random things in it, random digital items. And some of those items can be really good and really powerful and give you the ability to advance further in the game. And some of those items will be not very exciting. Is that gambling? Well, it depends on how we define the value of something that you may receive. A lot of people would think it's insane to spend money on something digital. And yet, a lot of other people may think it's insane to spend money on a really expensive meal. The point here is not that it's crazy or good to spend money on any of those things. The point here is that value is in the eye of the beholder. And therefore, if you are somebody who puts no value whatsoever in a video game and you buy that loot box, it may not have been gambling because you don't assign any value to the items that you receive. But if you're somebody who plays video games every day and takes it very seriously and is very competitive, then you assign tremendous value to the potential to get something that will make you stronger within the game. The law defines gambling as prize, chance, and consideration. Gamblers Anonymous takes a stricter definition. They say that gambling is any betting or wagering for self or others, whether for money or not, no matter how slight or insignificant, where the outcome is uncertain or depends upon chance or skill. For those of you who didn't know, poker has been considered a game of skill since California became a state back in the 1850s. Although our state constitution outlawed most or all forms of gambling for the vast majority of our history, poker has always been legal in California because it's considered a game of skill. And it becomes a question then of, does the state recognize it as gambling or do they recognize it as skill? But why can't it be both? So for example, in this poker analogy, the best player at a table, maybe the best two players at a table, will win the vast majority of the time. A professional poker player will make money at pretty much any poker table if they play at that table every single night with the same players for a year. However, on any given individual night, they can lose. They can lose a little, they can lose a lot. That advantage is never or almost never guaranteed. It's typically they put themselves in a position to be a 57% favorite or a 63% favorite. They try and create advantages. That same concept is what allows us, Yaamava, to exist. Most games in a casino have between a 1 and a 10% advantage. Now, a 10% advantage is much bigger. I think it's pretty obvious why we would I'll be able to win money consistently. 1% doesn't seem like a lot. But when you take that 1% over thousands or millions of hands, we will consistently win. And that's why they say the house always wins. However, because it is only 1%, people can win on any given day. And that's why gambling can be fun for so many people, because there is a chance to win. It's not 100% against them. It's 100% that the house will win enough to be profitable and to build a large, beautiful resort like we have here. But it's not 100% that any one player will lose. It's 100% that we will win over the tens of millions of bets that are placed throughout the year. So, when was gambling legalized? Well, I mentioned previously that when California joined the Union, when we became a state in 1850, poker was legal under our Constitution. It took more than 80 years from that point for us to expand or legalize any other form of gambling, when in 1933 we legalized horse racing. Again, because the state viewed it as a game of skill which was permitted under our Constitution. Now fast forward another more than 50 years, and in 1984 we legalized the lottery to help fund education. Today the California lottery actually does more ticket sales than any other lottery in the country. 3 years after the lottery was passed, in 1987, IGRA, or the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, was passed. Now this was in response to 2 Supreme Court decisions that had deemed it basically permitted and within the jurisdiction of tribal governments to operate gambling activities within their own borders, and IGRA created that structure. Over the ensuing 13 years, tribal gaming within California exploded. I myself worked in the gaming industry for about 15 years. I started in California in 1998. The first casino I worked in California was a barn. It was a literal barn that had been converted into a casino with a bunch of slot machines, a few table games, and absolutely no ventilation whatsoever. Later on, we expanded. We built a circus tent, a big circus tent, and we connected it to the back of our barn. In the year 2000, we voted on Prop 1A that amended the California Constitution and officially brought in the era of Class 3 tribal gaming. That same casino that I worked in, what did we do? We built a giant tool shed behind the circus tent, but we had like 2 months, 2 or 3 months from when we signed our compact to get to 2,000 slot machines, because whatever we had operating on that day would be what we could have operating forever. And 2 years later, we were in one of the nicest casinos in California, maybe in the country. Now, since Prop 1A has passed, gaming in California has grown at an exponential rate. California became the largest gambling state in the country, surpassing even Nevada. We've legalized several forms of gambling, several new forms, including advanced deposit wagering for the horse tracks, off-track betting as well, 50-50 raffles at sporting events, and quite a few others. All in all, we have 8 forms of legalized gambling in California, and the vast majority of that gambling has been legalized just in the last 40 years or so, after about 130 years, where all we had was poker for 80 years and then horse racing for another 50. So I've mentioned a few times today that the majority of our guests can gamble in what we call a responsible fashion, but what is responsible gaming? Well, we can kind of boil it down into 3 rules. The first rule is to set limits and stick to them. Now that doesn't just mean money, although that's what comes to most of our minds automatically, but also time. Maybe you got to the casino at 7 p.m. You have work the next day at 8 a.m. You came in with $100. Your limit was $100. And you had one of those nights where you just went up and down all night long. And all of a sudden it's 5 a.m. You've never been up more than $50. You've never been down more than $50. You're within your range. You had a win limit, you had a loss limit. You said, if I won $200, I go home. If I lose $100, I go home. Neither of those things happen. But all of a sudden it's 6, 7 a.m. You have to be at work at 8 a.m. You haven't slept. Maybe your family doesn't know where you are. You still haven't gambled responsibly. Second rule is to make sure that gambling is just a hobby and not the hobby. It shouldn't be the only thing you think about. It shouldn't be the only thing you want to do. It should not take away from important life or family or work events. If your kids have a soccer game, you shouldn't be at the casino missing the soccer game. If you have to be at work, if you have a family event, it should not be detracting from those events. And the third rule is that you should consider it as money spent and not money lost. You come to the casino to purchase entertainment. Just like if you go to the movies. A movie ticket these days, $20-something for a movie ticket. You buy a popcorn, a drink, a hot dog, and you bring somebody with you, it's $100 for the night. Whatever is within your comfort level, your discretionary spending level, whatever fits within your budget, it's always considered money spent. If you go to that same movie and the movie's awful, you don't get tempted to sneak into the theater next to you to get even. So the same should apply to the casino. You go to the casino to purchase a few hours of entertainment, therefore it's money spent. I know it sounds like semantics. It's not really about the words you use, it's about the way you view it.
Hey, Fred, open up.
What do you want?
How about a game of marbles, Fred?
Marbles? Come right in, boy. I need somebody to practice with. I have to get real good.
Why, Fred?
I got my reasons.
Hey, tell you what, Fred. We'll play for a nickel if you want to bet.
Bet?
So what are the criteria for gambling addiction? Well, clinically speaking, we look for 9 different criteria to assess whether or not somebody has a gambling disorder. Now, throughout this presentation, I've used the terms gambling addiction and problem gambling. That's the first time you've heard me say gambling disorder, and I won't use that term very often. Gambling disorder is the clinical term for the disease, the brain disease that is gambling addiction. However, most people tend to get a little bit confused when they hear disorder, and so we prefer to say gambling addiction. Now, what are those 9 criteria? Well, a few of them, all of you are going to be very familiar with. So there is chasing, which is the inability to accept a loss. There is lying, often to cover up where you've been, or how long you were there, or how much you've lost, or how much you've won. Preoccupation is when all you can do is think about gambling. Withdrawals. Believe it or not, people suffering from gambling addictions truly do have withdrawals. Somebody who develops a gambling addiction is actually developing an addiction to the chemical dopamine. Dopamine is a chemical that your own brain creates and secretes whenever you do anything that you enjoy. For those of you who smoke, when you've gone 3 hours without a cigarette, think about how you feel, the stress levels that are increasing. Do you think it's the nicotine, or do you think it's the hand-to-mouth action that your body is craving more? And for those of you who said nicotine, I would ask you, then how come nicotine patches and nicotine gum don't help? When you develop an addiction to smoking, when you develop an addiction to drugs, to alcohol, to any of those substances, a major part of that addiction is dopamine. When you develop an addiction to gambling, it is the same dopamine. As such, when you go a while without gambling, you will experience physical withdrawal symptoms if you have a full-blown addiction, things like shaking hands and all of the other symptoms that we associate with withdrawal. Now, other factors would include bailout, which is seeking to borrow money to pay off debts that have accrued because you've been gambling. Escape, you may be gambling just to numb out those feelings of depression or stress or anxiety from the real world. You may be risking significant relationships. Could be with a spouse, with your parents, with your children, with an employer, any relationship that's significant within your life. And you may also develop a tolerance. If you were to go home and drink 3 beers every night for the next month, you might get a buzz tonight. You might get drunk tonight. Next week it might be a buzz. And a month from now you would feel nothing. And how would you then get a buzz? By drinking a 4th beer, or a 5th beer, or a 6th. Gambling is the same thing. You can come in today and bet $5 a hand at the blackjack table, and your brain will generate that dopamine because you have those excitement levels. But if you do that same thing every day for a month, it's not enough. And then after a while, you'll be coming into the casino more frequently, and you'll be increasing your bets. Now, there are several different types of gamblers. The vast majority of our guests are able to gamble without a problem. Those are the ones that we would actually refer to as social gamblers. And among adults in California, that represents 70% of the population. Now, I also said that less than 4% of people will develop an addiction. So how can only 70% of people gamble responsibly? Well, that's because about 17% of people don't gamble at all. So if you put that together, it's actually 69.3%, something like that. But if you put those numbers together, you have just over 86% of people who either don't gamble or gamble responsibly. Now, there's another 10% of people who do gamble responsibly today, but they are what we would deem at risk. And there's a lot of different reasons you could be at risk. You may have grown up in a household where your parents were problem gamblers. You may have started gambling early in life. You may have certain behavioral health or psychological disorders. Somebody who suffers from depression, far more likely to develop a gambling addiction than somebody who does not. Why? Because they can go to the casino, they can play slot machines, and they can kind of numb out those feelings of depression. Doesn't mean that they have a problem today, but those are often the guests that we're most worried about, because we want to make sure that they understand the risks of gambling to excess so that they can gamble responsibly. And we want to make sure that if they call out for help, if they reach out to us for help, they get the information about those help and prevention services right away so that they're able to get help before it becomes a a problem. So about 2.2% of adults are what we would call problem gamblers. Now that's a really small number, 2%. But in a state as big as ours, that still is over 700,000 people. And then about 1.5% of people are what we would term disordered gamblers or gambling addicts. And that's about 450,000 to 500,000 adults in a state the size of California. So what is the difference between someone with a gambling problem and someone with a gambling addiction? Let's say you go to the bar on your Friday when you get off of work, and you go and you have one drink an hour, no more. And then one week you worked overtime and you got to the bar a little bit late and you ordered a third drink because you forgot there was a last call, the bar closed. And before you left, you chugged the beer because you didn't want to waste the money. And now you've had 3 drinks in 2 hours and you get pulled over on the way home and you get a DUI. Well, are you an alcoholic? Probably not. You're somebody who made a bad decision and now has a big problem. But how do we know? One way is by how you react to the situation. Did you get out of jail the next morning and you say, I can't believe I screwed up like that. I will never drink and drive again. And then you don't. Or do you get out of jail the next morning and you say, that was so stressful, I need a drink, and you go straight to the bar and drive home? Today's money is all digital. Everything is digital. Nobody carries cash anymore. We use debit cards and we use credit cards and we do electronic transfers and bank transfers. We don't touch money anymore. So when we go to the casino, it's very easy to lose track of how much we've actually spent. And we don't just realize it necessarily after a day or a week, but we will eventually have a day of reckoning. Maybe that day is the day the credit card bill comes in, or the day our spouse asks us why the bank account is empty. Do you go, oh my God, I can't believe that I just lost so much money over these last few weeks or few months or few days or few hours? Or do you try and borrow $5,000 from a friend or family member, bring it to the casino and double up to catch up? Obviously, in that latter case, we would be concerned that you have a gambling disorder. But if you stop gambling for a while, you start saving up, you pay off your bills, you get things back on track, and then you come back to the casino and you set limits and stick to them, then we would say you had a gambling problem. So what are the signs that somebody may be developing a gambling problem? We call gambling the hidden disease because it's often really hard to see. There are very few outward physical signs, and a lot of the signs require that you know the person. However, if you learn of somebody having an unexplained need for money, or if they have money or possessions missing, or unexplained charges on their credit card, or if they're having frequent mood swings, going through depression and anxiety, and then euphoria, if they're having withdrawals from friends and family or missing important friends or family events, if they're missing work or school, or if their performance is not as good as it used to be at work or at school, or if they're dropping outside activities and interests, if you find that they're excessively watching television or sports or horse racing, or if they now have an extreme overconfidence or lack of impulse control, or if they're participating in other high-risk behaviors such as binge drinking, or taking excessive amounts of drugs, or getting involved in other risky sexual behaviors. But the single biggest indicator is simply that the person tells you that they need help. Now, they're not very frequently going to come up to you and say, hey Robert, I've got a gambling addiction, can you help me? May happen, but usually it's going to happen in other words. They're going to come up to you and they're going to say, I can't believe I just lost my rent money. I can't go home, my wife's going to kill me. I should have been at work 3 hours ago and I'm going to get fired. All of these are the same thing as saying, I've got a problem and I need help. That doesn't mean that we can automatically diagnose them with a gambling addiction. Even if they literally just told us they do, it still takes a professional to make that final determination. And why is that? Because people can gamble and gamble to excess for lots of reasons. But sometimes those reasons are other than an actual gambling addiction. I mentioned earlier, if you suffer from depression, you may gamble in order to numb out those feelings of depression. Now, are you gambling to the point where you're being harmed from your gambling? Absolutely. But if we were to treat the gambling, then we would be ignoring the underlying disorder. Similarly, certain drugs may have side effects. Parkinson's is commonly treated by providing dopamine inhibitors. So then your body naturally seeks ways to generate more dopamine, and gambling is one of them. So if somebody reaches out to you for help, we can't know that they have a gambling addiction, but we can know that they need help, and we can know that they need to speak with a professional. Near the end of this class, we're going to talk about all the resources that are available at no charge where that person can speak with a professional, almost no requirements, and they can get help because help truly is available. Who are the Ambassadors? Well, the Ambassadors were a music group from the 1950s. No, I'm just kidding, guys. The ambassadors are the team members here at Yaamava that we have designated as those who are able to respond to a guest who reaches out for help. So specifically here at Yaamava, ambassadors are guest services. The significance and the reason we chose them to be ambassadors is because when a guest asks for help, the conversation about what's going on and what kind of help can we provide, that needs to happen in private. And it needs to happen by somebody who's had some additional communication training on how to speak with somebody in a crisis situation, and with somebody who knows how to provide the information about those help and prevention services in a way that's going to be consistent with how everyone else is doing it. The system that we have here at Yaamava, and the system that we at CCPG recommend as well, we consider best practices, is that for all of you watching this video, you are the ones who interact with the guests the most. You're the ones who are most likely to receive a guest cry for help. So if the guest reaches out to you, your role is to make sure that that guest is never left alone, because when they reach out for help, they may do it only one time and they may never do it again. But to notify your supervisor or your manager discreetly, or if you're able to notify guest services directly, that's okay, but send it up the chain of command. Through you, through your supervisor, through your department manager or shift manager, eventually to guest services. Make sure that the guest is not left alone, and an ambassador from guest services will come to speak with the guest, greet the guest, and take them somewhere private. Have a conversation with them. They will use some of the techniques that they receive in a longer version of this training, and ultimately provide that guest with information about self-exclusion and about help and prevention services that are available to the guest. So what is the impact on society? Well, by one measure, we could talk about crime. Based on a 2006 prevalence survey, 35% of disordered gamblers had been arrested and more than 20% had been incarcerated. That means 1 out of every 3 people suffering from a gambling disorder or gambling addiction has been arrested for a crime. So presumably, although we don't have specific data on this, a higher number have committed crimes, most in pursuit of their gambling, and 1 in 5 committed crimes that were so severe that they spent time in jail. Those numbers are more than 3 times the general public. Now, another way that we could measure the impact would be on the cost to society, specifically what we call the social cost. This is the cost that basically tax dollars pay as a result of treatment and prevention programs such as this one, as a result of monies that come out of or strain the system, things like the requirement for additional public services such as police enforcement, divorce and bankruptcy, incarceration and jails. The most recent survey is a little bit older, so if we take it in today's dollars, it's about $16,500 per addicted gambler. Saying if we know that there's about 466,000 addicted gamblers in California, that's a 17 billion with a B dollar cost to society through those things that we discussed. Now, obviously, we talked earlier in the presentation about gambling responsibly, and that is one of the things that we can do to lower the impact on society. We promote responsible gaming because that reduces the odds of people developing a problem. However, it does not eliminate them. Gambling addiction can happen to anybody, no matter how careful you are, how many responsible gaming guidelines you follow, some people will develop the addiction. When they do, they need to get help, because gambling addiction is a disease of the brain. And just like if you had cancer, you would never expect somebody to just get better from cancer through willpower. You would expect them to go to a doctor, to get treatment, and to follow through an intense regimen and a long period of recovery. We would expect the same thing from somebody suffering from a brain disease, in this case gambling addiction, or a disorder of the brain, I should say, in this case gambling addiction. Part of that overall treatment process for the individual may include self-exclusion. So most of you, I hope, are familiar with the self-exclusion program that we have here at Yaamava, where a guest comes to us, they ask to exclude, they fill out a form, they give us their ID, and then they're not allowed to come back or actually to go to any property or business or establishment owned by the tribe anywhere for a minimum of 1 year. After that year, the guest may apply for reinstatement, but it's not guaranteed. They need to demonstrate that they've been at least educated on what gambling addiction is, what their own personal risks are, and then they need to make a case to the tribe as to why they should be reinstated. Some guests may opt for a lifetime exclusion, in which case the bar for reinstatement is even higher. Now, I mentioned at the start of this video, self-exclusion, getting self-excluded in California can be a little bit challenging because there are so many different places that you have to go. But we here at Yaamava are fortunate. One of the biggest challenges for people who want to self-exclude is that in the majority of the cases in California, they actually have to travel to the casino, which can be a very triggering event. Then they have to figure out who to talk to, where to go, what forms to fill out. And because they have to go to so many different places, it can be very expensive, which is very difficult for somebody who is recovering from a disease that costs so much money. Fortunately, here they can just go to our website, download the form, they can get it notarized. Obviously, there's a little cost with notarization, but it's not the same cost as driving all around California, and they can mail that form back into us. If they do want to exclude from other casinos, they can go to www.howtoexclude.org. It has information on how you would self-exclude from the vast majority of the casinos in California. And then if that person is also gambling online, there's 3 major providers of gambling blocking software for your computer. Gamban is one of the 3. We don't actually recommend any one over any of the others because they all work different. Different ones are better for different people, but Gamban is one that we can actually provide for free through the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline. Now the helpline, 1-800-GAMBLER or 1-800-426-2537, it's kind of the central access point. So whenever somebody is in need of help for their gambling problem, we recommend that they call into the helpline. There's a brief recording when you call. It's no more than 8 seconds, and literally all it says is, this is the California Problem Gambling Helpline. Press 1 for English, 2 for Spanish, 3 for Mandarin, 4 for Cantonese, or stay on the line. From there, they speak directly to a live person. That person will connect them to a master's level counselor. The counselor will just have a natural conversation with them to find out what's going on. And then the counselor will help connect them to any of a variety of different treatment and prevention services that are available in California. These include one-on-one treatment, group treatment, intensive outpatient, which is 3 days a week, 4 hours a day for a month, residential care, which is 30 days in an inpatient facility, a variety of different self-help work booklets and information booklets that we can send out to you, various texting programs, including a motivational text messaging program, which will send 2 text messages a week directly to your cell phone based on what we call your stage of change. So like if you're thinking about getting help, but you're not quite there yet, the text messages will say, you can do it, today's the day. If you're in recovery, they'll say, great job, maintain your recovery. And every one of these services is available at no charge. Literally all we require is that they meet one of the 9 criteria that I discussed earlier. To be defined as a problem gambler, you have to meet 4. But we don't require that you have insurance, we don't require any income levels, and we only require that you meet one of the 9 criteria. Treatment programs can be anywhere up to 2, sometimes 4 or 6 months of direct one-on-one treatment. And even once those programs are no longer available, you can still participate in things like Gamblers Anonymous, a 12-step group, a nonprofit group that you can go to forever. Additionally, anybody who has been affected by someone else's gambling can take full unrestricted access of all of these programs that you see on screen, and those individuals would also have support groups such as Gamban. So what are the key takeaways for today? Most people can gamble responsibly, but some cannot. Gambling addiction can have a devastating impact on both the gambler and those around them, but it is treatable. There are help programs available, they cost nothing, and they truly are effective. They truly do work. And anyone can become addicted to gambling. It doesn't matter your race, your gender, your ethnicity, anybody can develop a gambling addiction, but only a professional can truly diagnose if you are addicted to gambling or if there is an underlying cause. And your role in all of this, it's to be aware of what's going on with your guests, to know how to respond to a guest who does reach out for help and make sure that guest is not left alone until an ambassador arrives, and to report any concerns that you may have to your supervisors or to an ambassador. And on that note, I would like to thank you all for your time today and for your time again this year. Once again, my name is Robert Jacobson. I'm with the California Council on Problem Gambling, and I would like to close by thanking Yaamava Casino and the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians for incorporating responsible gaming as a key part of its culture. And for all of you to know, it truly does work. As I mentioned, we run the 1-800-GAMBLER helpline, which means we see the data from that helpline. What we see is that the gamblers who call tell us that their primary casino of preference is Yaamava more than any other casino by a large margin. That doesn't mean that we have more addicted gamblers at Yaamava. It doesn't. It means that we do a better job of identifying those people who need help and of providing that help to them. So a huge, huge thank you to all of you who are committed to providing help to your guests, and of course to the ambassadors themselves for doing such a great job at encouraging the guests to reach out for help, because you're all making a difference. And we want you to know that your time spent each year is valuable time. So I thank you all again for your time this year, and I'll see you next year.